26, 1945. Elbe River checkpoint, Torgau sector, Germany. 14:30 hours. A German woman grabbed Callum Devereux's arm. Her fingers dug into his sleeve like claws. Tears carved lines through the dirt on her face. She whispered 5 words in broken English that would destroy his entire life. "Please, don't let them take me." Behind her, 20 yards back, a Soviet major was walking closer. His hand rested on the grip of his Tokarev pistol. His eyes burned with the cold satisfaction of a hunter who had finally found his prey. The afternoon sun caught the scar tissue running down the left side of his face, a souvenir from Stalingrad that had turned half his smile into a permanent sneer. Callum Devereux had exactly 3 seconds to decide: follow orders and hand this woman over to certain death, or lie to his commanding officers, commit treason against the Allied agreement signed 3 months ago at Yalta, and become a hunted deserter. He was 23 years old, a motor pool mechanic from South Boston. He fixed trucks. He followed rules. He had survived 2 years of war by keeping his head down and his hands busy. He had never wanted to be a hero. But in that moment, with her nails digging crescents into his forearm and her blue eyes begging him for mercy, he had no authority to give. Private Callum Devereux made a choice that would brand him a traitor, destroy his military career, and change 2 lives forever. Let me take you back to that checkpoint where everything began. The Elbe River had become a border between hope and horror. In the final weeks of April 1945, Germany was dying. The 1,000-year Reich that Adolf Hitler had promised was collapsing in flames and rubble and blood. And caught in the middle were millions of ordinary Germans who wanted only one thing: to escape the Soviet army advancing from the east. The American checkpoint near Torgau processed over 3,000 refugees every single day. 3,000 faces, 3,000 stories, 3,000 desperate people begging for safety on the western side of a river that now divided life from death. Yesterday alone, 3,247 people had passed through this checkpoint. 89 of them had been sent to Soviet custody under the terms of the Yalta Agreement. None of them were ever seen again. The landscape surrounding the checkpoint looked like the end of the world. Artillery bombardments had turned flat farmland into a moonscape of craters. Villages that once held families, and churches and markets were now blackened skeletons of stone and charred timber. The smell hung over everything: diesel fuel from American trucks, smoke from fires still burning in the distance, and something worse: the sweet, terrible stench of bodies left unburied for too many days. Private Callum Devereux stood at his post and watched the human river flow toward him. He was responsible for 47 vehicles in the 69th Infantry Division motor pool, 23 GMC CCKW 2.5-ton trucks, 12 Willys MB Jeeps, 8 Dodge WC series weapons carriers, 4 M4 Sherman tanks that broke down more often than they ran. His job was to keep them moving, keep them running, keep the American war machine grinding forward until there was nothing left to grind. He had joined the army in June of 1943 because he believed in something. Now, after 2 years of war, after watching friends die in frozen forests during the Battle of the Bulge, after seeing things no 23-year-old should ever have to see, he wasn't sure what he believed anymore. He fixed trucks. He fixed jeeps. He tried not to think too much about the larger questions of why he was here and what any of it meant. The refugees came in waves. Women with hollow cheeks and eyes that had witnessed too much. Children clutching their mothers' skirts too tired to cry. Old men shuffling forward on feet wrapped in cloth because their shoes had worn through weeks ago. They carried bundles of clothing, photographs, whatever small pieces of their old lives they could hold in trembling hands. A German-American translator stood beside the checkpoint, shouting in both languages. "Papers ready. Women and children to the left. Men for questioning to the right. Have your identification ready." Callum had learned to spot the ones who were hiding something, the nervous glances, the hands that shook when presenting documents, the stories that didn't quite add up when you asked the same question twice. Most of the time it didn't matter. These were civilians fleeing a war they hadn't started and couldn't stop. He waved them through because what else could he do? They were human beings. They were terrified. The war was over for them. But then there were the Soviet liaison officers. 3 of them stood near a separate checkpoint 30 yards away, watching the refugee flow with cold, calculating attention. They wore Red Army uniforms decorated with medals that caught the afternoon light. Their job was simple: identify any Germans who had served in the Wehrmacht, the German military, and claim them for Soviet custody under the terms agreed upon by Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin 3 months earlier at the Yalta Conference. For German military personnel who had fought on the Eastern Front, that meant one thing: Soviet custody. And everyone knew what Soviet custody meant. It meant interrogation. It meant labor camps in Siberia. It meant for many a death sentence carried out slowly over years of frozen winters and starvation rations. Major Leonid Krupin was the worst of them. He was 42 years old. The scar running down the left side of his face was a souvenir from Stalingrad, where he had watched his younger brother bleed out in the rubble while German snipers picked off anyone who tried to help. He smoked Belomorkanal cigarettes, the harsh Soviet brand that smelled like burning rope. His eyes moved across the crowd of refugees like a predator selecting prey from a herd. When he found someone he wanted, he smiled, not with warmth, with satisfaction. In the 3 weeks he had been stationed at this checkpoint, Major Krupin had sent 347 prisoners back to Moscow. He knew exactly what would happen to them. He didn't care. In his mind, every German in a Soviet labor camp was justice for Stalingrad, justice for Leningrad, justice for 20 million Soviet dead. Among the refugees pressing toward the checkpoint that April morning was a woman who understood this better than most. Annalisa Hartmann was 28 years old. For the past 4 years, she had served as a surgical nurse in the Wehrmacht medical service. She had spent those years in field hospitals across Poland and eastern Germany, treating wounded German soldiers who came to her broken and bleeding and dying. She had held boys younger than her younger brother as they took their last breaths. She had performed 127 surgeries during artillery bombardments, her hands steady even when the ground shook and plaster dust fell from the ceiling onto open wounds. She had done everything asked of her by a country that was now asking her to die for its sins. 2 weeks ago, when the Soviet advance made staying impossible, she had run. She had cut her blonde hair short with kitchen scissors, hacking away until what remained barely reached her ears. She had taken her Wehrmacht nurse's uniform, the grey wool dress with the Red Cross armband, and burned it in a farmhouse stove, watching 4 years of her life turn to ash and smoke. She had stolen civilian clothes from an abandoned apartment in a town whose name she no longer remembered. And she had traded her mother's wedding ring, the only thing she had left of her family, for forged identity papers. Her parents had died on February 13th in Dresden. The Allied firebombing had turned the city into an inferno. Her mother and father had been visiting her aunt when the first wave of bombers arrived. They had burned to death in a cellar while the city above them melted into slag. The wedding ring was the only thing Annalisa had to remember them by. She had worn it on a chain around her neck for 2 months. Now it was gone. Traded to a forger for papers that said she was Liesel Hoffmann, a schoolteacher from Dresden displaced by the bombing. Not a single word was true except the part about Dresden. She stood in line at the checkpoint, her heart pounding so hard she thought her ribs might crack. 10 people ahead of her, then 9, then 8. She whispered a prayer she had repeated for 14 days straight, ever since she started running. Please, God, let me pass. Don't let them see, don't let them know. 7 people, 6, 5. Major Krupin was scanning the crowd again. His eyes moved systematically across faces, searching for recognition, for fear, for the small tells that revealed hidden truths. He was good at this. He had been doing it for 3 weeks. He could smell Wehrmacht personnel the way a wolf smells wounded prey. Annalisa kept her head down. She had learned that survival meant becoming invisible. She had learned that in a world gone mad, drawing attention meant death. 4 people, 3, 2, she reached the front of the line. An American soldier stood before her, young, tired green eyes, freckles scattered across a sunburned nose, grease stains on his mechanic's uniform that no amount of washing would ever remove. His name tag read, Devereaux. She extended her forged papers with hands that trembled despite every effort to keep them still. He took them, barely glanced at them, started to wave her through. For one beautiful moment she thought she had made it. 14 days of running. 14 days of sleeping in ditches and drinking from streams and eating whatever scraps she could find. All of it was about to end. She was 50 feet from safety. 50 feet from the western side of the Elbe River, 50 feet from a future that didn't end in a Soviet labor camp. Then a voice cut through the chaos like a blade, Russian, harsh, commanding. Stoi, эта женщина. Stop, that woman. Annaliese's blood turned to ice. She turned slowly, already knowing what she would see. Major Leonid Krupin was walking toward the checkpoint. His finger pointed directly at her face. His boots crunched against gravel with each step. His eyes held the satisfaction of a predator who had finally caught what he'd been hunting. Wehrmacht nurse, he announced in heavily accented German, loud enough for everyone to hear. Togau Field Hospital, I saw you there, November of 1943. You treated German wounded while Soviet prisoners died in the next room. The accusation hung in the air like poison. Around them, other refugees shrank back, grateful that someone else had been chosen, grateful it wasn't them. The American soldiers looked confused, waiting for translation. The German-American corporal repeated Major Krupin's words in English, his voice flat and professional. Callum Devereaux's eyes widened. Wehrmacht meant German military. That meant this woman was supposed to be handed over to Soviet custody under the Allied agreements. That meant whatever happened next was supposed to be out of American hands. Annaliese's forged papers fluttered to the ground. Her legs refused to move. 14 days of running, 14 days of praying, 14 days of believing she might actually survive, all of it ending here, 50 feet from safety. Major Krupin smiled again, that cold, satisfied smile. And then something inside Anneliese Hartmann broke, not into pieces, into action. Her body moved before her mind could decide. She didn't run away from the checkpoint. She ran toward it, toward the one person whose eyes had shown even a flicker of humanity in this machinery of processing and sorting and sending people to their deaths. She grabbed Private Callum Devereaux's arm with both hands. Her fingers dug into his sleeve like she was drowning, and he was driftwood. She looked up at him, this American stranger, whose name she didn't know, and spoke in the broken English she had learned from treating Allied prisoners of war. Please, don't let them take me. I helped Americans. I helped your men. I am nurse. Please, they will kill me. Please. Her nails dug into his arm hard enough to leave marks through the fabric. Callum froze. Time seemed to stop around him. The noise of the checkpoint faded to a distant roar. He felt her hands shaking against his sleeve. He saw the absolute terror in her blue eyes, eyes that had witnessed too much death and were now begging for one more chance at life. Behind her, Major Krupin was approaching. His hand moved toward the Tokarev pistol at his belt. 20 yards away. 15. 10. Behind Callum, his sergeant was turning to see what the commotion was about. In that frozen moment, Callum Devereaux thought about Kieran Gallagher. Kieran had been his best friend since basic training at Fort Benning in June of 1943. They had survived the frozen hell of the Battle of the Bulge together. They had promised each other they would both make it home to Boston. They would drink cold Narragansett beer at Doyle's Cafe on Washington Street. They would forget everything they had seen. Then on December 19, 1944, in the Ardennes forest, German 88mm artillery had found their position. Shrapnel had ripped Kieran open like paper. He was 19 years old. His intestines were spilling out onto snow that turned red, faster than Callum could comprehend. Callum had held him, pressed useless hands against wounds that wouldn't close, wounds that nothing could close. Kieran had gripped Callum's collar with fading strength. At exactly 8:47 in the morning, with his life leaking out onto frozen ground, Kieran Gallagher had whispered his final words. "Take care of them, Cal, the ones who can't fight back. Promise me. Swear it." Callum had promised, he had sworn, he had held Kieran Gallagher until the medics came 4 minutes later and told him there was nothing more to do. He had carried that promise through 4 more months of combat, through nightmares that woke him sweating in his bunk, through the moral weight of a war where everyone claimed to be righteous, but everyone committed terrible acts. Now here was a woman, enemy nationality, Wehrmacht background, everything his orders demanded he hand over to Soviet justice, everything the Yalta Agreement required him to transfer immediately to Major Krupin's custody. But looking at her face, he didn't see an enemy. He saw the same fear he had seen in a French girl hiding from SS patrols in a cellar in Caen in July of 1944. The same desperation he had witnessed when American soldiers liberated a Jewish family hidden behind a false wall in a farmhouse outside Aachen. The same human terror that existed beyond uniforms and flags and politics. He saw someone who needed protection from people who would hurt her. He heard Kieran's voice in his head, as clear as if his friend was standing beside him. "Take care of them, Cal. The ones who can't fight back." Private Callum Devereux covered her hands with his own. He looked at Major Leonid Krupin with a steady gaze he did not feel inside, and he spoke words that were complete lies. "She's coming with me, sir. I need to question her. She claims to have intelligence on remaining Wehrmacht positions in the Torgau sector, supply caches, fallback routes, medical facilities still operational." Major Krupin stopped walking, his eyes narrowed with suspicion and anger. "This woman is German military personnel. She belongs in Soviet custody for war crimes investigation. The Yalta Agreement requires you to transfer her to me immediately." Callum's mind raced for any response that would work, any string of words that might buy him time, any plausible excuse that would prevent this woman from being dragged away to die in Siberia. "And if she has intelligence that could save American lives, Major, I need to extract that information first. Standard protocol for any potential intelligence asset." There was no such protocol. Callum Devereux was a mechanic who fixed trucks and jeeps. He had no training in interrogation. He had no authority to detain anyone for intelligence purposes. He was making everything up as the words left his mouth. Major Krupin studied him with cold calculation. The Soviet officer was weighing his options. Push this confrontation and create an international incident with an ally, or let one German nurse escape and find easier targets among the 3,000 other refugees who would pass through this checkpoint today. Finally, Major Krupin spoke through clenched teeth. "Your superiors will hear of this, Private. You are making a very serious mistake." He turned and walked away, already scanning the crowd for other prey. Other Wehrmacht personnel he could send east. Other Germans he could make pay for Stalingrad and Leningrad and his brother's death. Callum's sergeant was approaching now. He had maybe 30 seconds to figure out what he was going to do with a German nurse he had just claimed was an intelligence asset when he had absolutely no idea how to handle such a situation. Annalisa looked up at him. Tears streamed down her dirt-covered face. She spoke in German first, then repeated it in broken English. "Danke, thank you, thank you." Callum Devereux looked down at her and realized he had just stepped off a cliff. There was no going back now, no way to undo what he had done, no way to return to the simple life of a mechanic who followed orders and kept his head down and fixed broken vehicles and asked no questions. "Don't thank me yet," he said quietly, unsure if she understood his English. "I have no idea what happens next." But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't going to let them take her. Whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, he had made his choice, And Callum Devereaux, mechanic from South Boston, who had never wanted to be a hero, who just wanted to survive the war and go home to his mother and his neighborhood, and his simple life had become something he had never planned to be: a protector of the enemy, a liar to his own command, and possibly, though he didn't know it yet, a deserter who would never see home again. The checkpoint continued processing refugees. 3,000 stories, 3,000 desperate faces. But for Callum and Annalise, the world had narrowed to a single truth. They were in this together now, and there was no turning back. That night, Callum Devereaux lay in his bunk, staring at the canvas ceiling above him. Around him, other soldiers snored peacefully. They had no idea that 20 yards away, behind stacks of spare tires and under oil-stained tarps in the motor pool, a German woman was hiding. A woman whose life now depended entirely on Callum's ability to keep lying. He had given Annalise his canteen and 2 K-ration boxes, a breakfast unit with ham and eggs, a dinner unit with beef and pork. He had promised to return at dawn. He had watched her curl up between jerry cans and the fence, barely visible in the shadows, and he had walked away feeling her terrified eyes on his back. Now, unable to sleep, he understood the full weight of what he had done. He had lied to a Soviet officer. Strike 1. He had lied to his own sergeant. Strike 2. He had hidden enemy military personnel on an American base. Strike 3. Any single one of these crimes meant a court-martial. All 3 together might mean a firing squad. The United States Army did not look kindly on soldiers who aided the enemy. Even if the war was over, even if Germany had already surrendered, even if the woman in question was a nurse who had never fired a weapon. The rules were the rules, and Callum had broken every single one. Dawn arrived too quickly. Callum pulled on his uniform with hands that trembled slightly. He walked through camp trying to look normal. Other soldiers stumbled toward the mess tent for powdered eggs and weak coffee. Nobody paid him any attention. Why would they? He was just Devereaux, the quiet mechanic who fixed broken vehicles and never caused trouble. The irony almost made him laugh. If they knew what he had done yesterday, if they knew what he was hiding in the motor pool, they would tackle him to the ground before he made it 10 steps. He found Annalise exactly where he had left her. She was curled between equipment crates, barely visible under the tarp. When she heard his footsteps, she sat up fast, eyes wide with fear. Then she recognized him, and her whole body sagged with relief. "I thought maybe you would not come," she whispered in her broken English. "I thought maybe you would decide it is too dangerous." Callum knelt down, checking that they were alone. The motor pool wouldn't come alive for another 20 minutes. They had time, not much, but enough. "I promised, didn't I?" He handed her fresh water and his own breakfast rations. She took them with shaking hands. "Thank you. You give me your food," he shrugged. "I can get more. You can't." She nodded slowly. Then, instead of eating immediately, she asked the question he had been dreading. "What happens now?" "You cannot hide me forever." Callum sat back on his heels. His mind had been racing all night, cycling through options that all ended badly. "Lieutenant Ashford wants to see me in an hour. He's going to ask about you, about the intelligence you supposedly have." Annalise's face went pale. "I have no intelligence." "I was only nurse. I know nothing of military value. I know that, and you know that, but they don't know that yet." He pulled out a wrinkled map he had stolen from the headquarters tent the previous night. The theft had been easy. Nobody watched maps anymore. The war was over. Germany had surrendered, but this particular map showed field hospital locations across eastern Germany and Poland, places where Annalise had actually served. "So we're going to make some up." For the next 45 minutes, crouched in a hiding spot that smelled of motor oil and canvas and old grease, Callum Devereaux and Annalise Hartman constructed the most elaborate lie of both their lives. He showed her positions on the map, towns where German hospitals had actually existed. She told him which ones were real, which units had passed through, which details would sound believable to American intelligence officers who didn't know the difference between a field hospital and a casualty clearing station. He asked her questions an interrogator might ask. She practiced answers that mixed truth with careful invention. Yes, she had been a Wehrmacht nurse. That much was true. Yes, she had treated wounded soldiers from various divisions. Also true. Yes, she had overheard officers talking about troop movements and supply shortages and the general chaos of Germany's collapse. But when it came to specific details, unit numbers, commander names, strategic positions, she had nothing. Because nurses weren't briefed on military strategy. Nurses treated wounds and changed bandages and held dying boys while they cried for their mothers. What if they ask about specific commanders? Annaliese's voice was tight with stress. What if they know I am lying? Callum thought carefully before responding. Then you tell them you were just a nurse. You heard names but didn't understand ranks. You remember faces but not unit designations. Confusion is believable. You've been running for 2 weeks. You're exhausted and traumatized. Fuzzy details aren't suspicious. They're human. She studied him with something like wonder in her eyes. You are good at this, at deception, he smiled without any real humor. I've been in the army for 2 years. You learn to lie convincingly or you learn to suffer. I chose lying. Before she could respond, footsteps approached from the far side of the motor pool. Callum's heart lurched. He motioned for Annalise to stay absolutely still and stepped out from behind the tarp just as Corporal Ezra Whitlock rounded the corner. Ezra was Callum's supervisor in the motor pool, a farm kid from Iowa who had never wanted to fight anyone. He just wanted to go home, marry his sweetheart Claire, and grow corn for the rest of his life. He talked about Claire constantly, showed everyone the letters she sent, showed everyone the photograph he kept in his helmet. Devereaux, you seen that German woman everyone's talking about? Ezra's voice sounded casual, but his eyes were sharp. Callum forced his pulse to stay calm. What German woman? Come on, everyone in camp knows you grabbed some nurse at the checkpoint yesterday. Told that Soviet major you were questioning her for intelligence. Ezra crossed his arms. So where is she? Captain Straight from S2 is looking for her. Wants to do a proper interrogation. This was the moment. Callum could confess right now. Hand Annalise over to intelligence. Claim he had made an error in judgment. Accept whatever punishment came. It would be the smart decision, the safe decision, the decision that might save his career and possibly his life. Instead, he heard himself lie again. She's secured in Supply Tent 3. I've been keeping her separated until S2 was ready for her. Supply Tent 3 was on the other side of camp, completely empty. Nobody had used it in weeks. Ezra's eyes narrowed. He knew Callum well enough to sense something was wrong. For a long, uncomfortable moment, the two men stared at each other. Ezra's jaw worked, his hands flexed at his sides. Callum could see him processing the lie, weighing his options, deciding what to do. Finally, Ezra sighed deeply. Pure frustration. Jesus, Devereaux, what did you get yourself into? Something I can't get out of, not without help. Help doing what? Hiding an enemy combatant. Ezra's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. You know what they do to soldiers who desert, who aid the enemy. She's not the enemy. Callum's voice came out harder than he intended. The war is over, Ezra. Germany surrendered. She's just a terrified woman who will be killed if we hand her to the Soviets. Ezra looked away. His jaw worked with internal struggle. Callum could see the conflict playing out across his face. Rules versus conscience, duty versus humanity. Ezra thought about Claire, his fiancée back in Iowa, the girl he wrote to every single week, the girl he had promised to marry when he got home. If someone was chasing Claire, if someone wanted to hurt her, what would Ezra do? Would he follow the rules or would he protect her? He would protect her, regardless of the rules, regardless of the consequences. Finally, Ezra spoke without meeting Callum's eyes. I didn't see anything. Don't know where she is. Don't want to know, he paused. But if this comes back on me, I'm telling the truth. That you lied. That I didn't know, understood, and Ezra walked away quickly, his boots crunching on gravel. Callum sagged against a jeep, adrenaline leaving him shaky. That was too close, and the worst part was knowing that the real danger hadn't even started yet. At 0900 hours, Callum was summoned to Lieutenant Nathaniel Ashford's tent. Ashford was a West Point graduate who ran everything by regulation and expected the same from every soldier under his command. His uniform was always pressed. His boots were always polished. His questions were always direct and difficult to dodge. Callum stood at attention, trying to keep his face neutral while his stomach churned with anxiety. "At ease, Devereux." Ashford didn't look up from the paperwork on his desk. "Major Krupin filed a formal complaint this morning. He claims you obstructed Soviet authority at the checkpoint yesterday. He claims you detained a German military nurse without proper authorization. He claims this woman is wanted for war crimes." Callum's heart dropped into his boots. War crimes. That was new information. That changed everything. "Sir, the woman claimed she had intelligence on Wehrmacht positions and supply locations in the Torgau sector. I secured her for S2 interrogation according to standard procedure." "According to what standard procedure exactly?" Ashford finally looked up. His eyes were hard as granite. "You're a mechanic, Devereux, not intelligence, not an interrogator. What made you think you had authority to detain anyone?" Callum scrambled for an answer that would hold. "Sir, during the bulge we were briefed that any potential intelligence sources should be secured immediately. German medical personnel often have detailed knowledge of unit movements and casualty figures. I thought—" "You thought?" Ashford's voice was flat and cold. "Do you know what Major Krupin claims this woman actually did?" "No, sir." "He says she was assigned to a Wehrmacht hospital that performed medical experiments on Soviet prisoners. He says she's wanted for questioning about crimes against humanity." The words hit Callum like a punch to the chest. He thought about Annaliese's scarred hands, her exhausted face, the way she had begged him not to let them take her, the terror in her eyes when she said they would kill her. Was it possible? Had he protected someone who had done terrible things? No. He had looked into her eyes. He had seen fear, not guilt. He had seen a woman running for her life, not a criminal hiding from justice. And even if Major Krupin's accusations contained some truth, Callum doubted the Soviets wanted her for legitimate justice. They wanted revenge. They wanted to make an example. They wanted someone to punish for 4 years of brutal warfare on the Eastern Front, someone to pay for Stalingrad and Leningrad and 20 million Soviet dead. "Sir, with respect, she claims she helped American prisoners of war. That should be verified before we hand her to anyone." Ashford studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment. "You believe her story?" "Yes, sir, I do." Another lie. Callum wasn't sure what he believed anymore. He only knew that handing her over felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain. In a way that reminded him of Kieran Gallagher bleeding out in the snow, making him promise to protect the ones who couldn't fight back. Ashford sighed heavily. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to deliver this woman to Captain Strait at S2 this afternoon. Intelligence will interrogate her properly. If she has legitimate information, we'll process it through official channels. If she doesn't, or if Major Krupin's allegations have any merit, she goes to Soviet custody immediately." "Yes, sir." Dismissed. Now Callum left the tent feeling like a man standing on thin ice, hearing cracks spread beneath his feet with every step forward. He had maybe 4 hours before S2 expected delivery of a prisoner he had hidden in the motor pool, a prisoner he had filled with rehearsed lies that wouldn't survive professional interrogation. He found Annalisa sitting exactly where he had left her. Her knees were pulled to her chest, her eyes were huge with waiting. "We have a problem," he said without any gentle introduction. "They're claiming you committed war crimes, medical experiments on Soviet prisoners." Her face drained of all color. "No, never. That is lie. I treated wounded, German and Allied. I never harmed anyone. I tried to save lives. That was my only purpose. I believe you, but Major Krupin is pushing hard. He wants you badly, and S2 expects me to deliver you to Captain Strait in 4 hours for proper interrogation." Annalisa started shaking. Her whole body trembled with fear she could no longer control. "If they give me to Soviets, I will not survive interrogation. They will not care about truth. They will make me confess to anything. They will break me until I say whatever they want me to say." Callum knelt in front of her. Then we don't let them take you. How you said yourself you cannot hide me forever. I know what I said, but I'm figuring something out. He had no idea what, but saying the words out loud made them feel almost possible. Annalisa looked at him with eyes that had stopped hoping days ago and were now trying to hope again. You have helped me so much already. You should not risk more. You should let me go. Tell them I escaped. Tell them you tried to stop me. Tell them it is not your fault. The suggestion was logical. Callum could claim she had overpowered him, stolen a vehicle, disappeared into the chaos of post-war Germany. He would face minor discipline, maybe lose a rank, but nothing serious. His life would continue. He looked at this woman he had known for less than 24 hours. This stranger who had grabbed his arm and changed everything. He thought about Kieran Gallagher, dying in frozen snow, whispering that promise, making Callum swear to protect the ones who couldn't fight back. No, he said simply. I'm not letting you go. We're seeing this through together. Annalisa's eyes filled with tears. Why, you don't know me. You don't owe me anything. My best friend died saving my life. Maybe this is how I pay that forward, or maybe I'm just tired of following orders that feel wrong. Either way, you're stuck with me. She reached out and touched his hand, a small gesture that meant everything. You are a good man, Callum Devereux. I'm a mechanic from Boston who's in way over his head. He stood up. Decision made. Can you drive? She blinked in confusion. Drive what? A truck. Can you drive a truck? Yes. In hospital, sometimes I drive ambulance. Callum grabbed supplies and started shoving them into a canvas bag. Rations, water, medical kit, map, compass, flashlight, everything they would need to survive in the wilderness between here and British lines. Then we're leaving now. We're getting out of this camp, crossing to British lines and disappearing before anyone realizes we're gone. Annalisa stared at him. That is desertion. They will hunt you. They will execute you if they catch you. Only if they catch us. He looked at her directly. Unless you want to wait for S2 get interrogated, then handed to the Soviets. Annalisa stood up, still shaking, but with something new in her eyes, determination, hope. Then we go together. 20 minutes later, a GMCC CWK 2.5-ton truck rolled out of the motor pool. Nobody stopped it. Nobody questioned it. Mechanics took vehicles out for test drives all the time. The fuel tank was full, 20 gallons, enough to get them maybe 80 kilometers if they were careful. Callum drove. Annalisa sat in the passenger seat, a canvas tarp ready to pull over her head if they encountered checkpoints. Behind them, the camp continued its daily routine. Unaware that Private Callum Devereux had just committed the most serious crime of his life. Desertion in the face of the enemy. Aiding enemy military personnel. Theft of United States Army property. The crimes stacked up like cards in a house that was about to collapse. But Callum didn't care anymore. He had made his choice. He had stepped off the cliff. Now there was only the fall, and whatever waited at the bottom. They drove west, toward British lines, toward freedom, toward a future that existed only if they could cross 40 kilometers of occupied Germany without being caught. The truck's engine roared. The road disappeared beneath them. And for the first time since Kieran Gallagher died in his arms, Callum Devereux felt like he was doing something that mattered. Not fixing trucks, not following orders, not keeping his head down, protecting someone who needed protection the way Kieran had asked him to, the way he should have been doing all along. The truck's engine coughed twice and died. Callum turned the key again. Nothing. Just a clicking sound that echoed through the empty forest like a death sentence. He slammed his palm against the steering wheel and looked at Annalisa. Her face had gone pale in the fading afternoon light. They had made it maybe 40 kilometers before the fuel gauge dropped below empty, then past empty, then into the red zone that meant they were running on fumes and prayers. Now both had run out. "We walk," Callum said. grabbing the supply bag from behind the seat. The forest pressed in around them. Dense pine trees blocked most of the remaining daylight. Thick undergrowth made every step difficult. This was the kind of wilderness where a person could hide forever or get lost and never be found. They had left the main road an hour ago when Callum spotted Soviet patrol vehicles in the distance. He had chosen concealment over speed. Now that choice felt like it might kill them both. Annalisa climbed out of the truck, stumbling slightly. She had barely eaten in days. The adrenaline that had kept her moving was fading into pure exhaustion. Callum caught her elbow and steadied her. "How far to British lines?" she asked. He checked the map, trying to calculate distance against terrain. "Maybe 20 kilometers through this forest, then across open farmland, then we hit the British sector near Wittenberg. 20 kilometers, 12 miles, in peacetime an easy day's walk." But Callum's ankle was swelling from jumping out of the truck too hard. His ribs ached from the rough drive through cratered roads, and Annalisa looked ready to collapse. "We cannot make that tonight," she said quietly. "No, we need to hide, rest, move again at dawn." He scanned the darkening woods. "There, see that ridge might be caves or overhangs, somewhere out of sight." They climbed through thick undergrowth as night fell. Every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot. Every bird call made them freeze. Behind them, distant voices carried through the trees, Russian voices. The Soviets were searching, probably following the abandoned truck's trail. Callum's mind raced with calculations. The truck would lead them to this area. Dogs would pick up their scent. They had maybe an hour before the search reached them, maybe less. Under the ridge, they found what Callum had hoped for. A shallow cave formed by collapsed boulders, barely big enough for two people, but hidden by ferns and heavy brush. "In here," he whispered, pulling aside the vegetation. They crawled inside. The space was so tight they had to sit shoulder to shoulder, knees pulled up to their chests. It smelled of damp earth and animal musk. Something had lived here before. Hopefully, not recently. Outside footsteps approached, boots crunching on pine needles, voices speaking Russian, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, sweeping back and forth across the trees. Callum put his hand over Annalisa's mouth, not to silence her, but to remind her that even breathing too loudly could give them away. She nodded, understanding. Her eyes were huge in the darkness. The voices came closer. They came this way. "Truck tracks lead here. Spread out. Search everything. Major Krupin wants them alive." Alive. That was almost worse than dead. Callum thought about what the Soviets would do to an American deserter. Thought about what they would do to Annalisa. His hand moved to the pistol at his belt, the one he had grabbed from the truck. 8 rounds? If it came to that, if they were cornered with no escape, he would make sure Annalisa didn't get taken alive, and then he would make sure he didn't either. But the footsteps passed, the voices faded. The flashlights moved deeper into the forest away from their hiding spot. Callum waited 10 full minutes before removing his hand from Annalisa's mouth, before allowing himself to breathe normally. "They are gone," she whispered. "For now. They'll be back at dawn with more men and dogs. We need to move before sunrise." She leaned her head back against cold stone. "I am sorry. This is my fault. You would be safe if you had never helped me." Callum looked at her in the cramped darkness. "You didn't force me, I chose. And I would choose again." He opened the supply bag, pulled out 2 K-ration boxes, handed one to Annalisa. She opened it slowly. A breakfast unit, ham and eggs. She stared at the canned meat like she hadn't seen food in days, because she hadn't, really. "When did you last eat?" Callum asked. She thought about it. 2 days ago. Stale bread, water from a stream. "Then eat. We need strength for tomorrow." They ate in silence at first. The food was terrible. Military rations always were, But when you were hungry enough, anything tasted good. Annalise held up a compressed graham cracker bar. What is this, Cor? Graham crackers? Sweet biscuit, try it. She took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly. Is good. Sweet. Callum opened his own ration, beef and pork unit. The smell took him back to Boston. Not the same, but it reminded him of his mother's pot roast on Sundays. Potatoes and carrots swimming in gravy. The whole family gathered around the table, his younger brother complaining about vegetables, his mother telling him to eat them anyway. A simpler time, a time before war, a time he wasn't sure he'd ever see again. My mother, he said quietly, makes pot roast, potatoes, carrots, gravy, Sunday dinner, whole family together. I used to think it was nothing special. Now, he trailed off. Annalisa nodded, understanding in her eyes. My mother made schnitzel, pork pounded thin, breaded, fried golden, with potatoes and lemon. I can still smell it sometimes, even though she is gone. Dresden, February. The firebombing. Silence fell between them. Both had lost families to this war. Both were eating canned military rations while hiding in a cave from people who wanted to kill them. After the war, Annalisa said softly, if we survive, what will you do? Go home to Boston. Open a garage maybe. Fix cars. Simple life. He looked at her in the darkness. You? I do not know. No family. No home left. Maybe I will just be glad to be alive. Callum reached out and took her hand. When we get through this, not if when you'll have a home, with me, if you want. She squeezed his hand back. I want. They finished eating, shared the canteen water. Callum set his watch for 0400. They would take turns sleeping, though neither really expected to sleep. Too dangerous. Too much adrenaline. When grey light began filtering through the ferns, a new sound made them both freeze. Truck engines. Multiple vehicles. Shouting in Russian and English. The search had intensified. Major Krupin had escalated this into a joint Soviet-American operation. An American deserter captured with Soviet cooperation would make both sides look good, show Allied unity, demonstrate that justice would be served regardless of nationality. They would find this cave eventually. The search was too thorough, too systematic. Callum pointed through a gap in the foliage. There. British checkpoint. See the flag. The Union Jack hung limp in the still morning air. Maybe 50 meters of open ground between them and salvation. Behind them, soldiers were crashing through the trees, minutes away, maybe seconds. Ready? Callum asked. Annalisa gripped his hand. Together. They burst from the tree line and sprinted across ploughed farmland. Their feet sank into soft earth with every step. Their lungs burned with effort. Behind them, soldiers emerged from the forest. Rifles cracked. The sound echoed across the open field. Dirt kicked up around their feet, halfway across, 3/4, almost there. Something slammed into Callum's shoulder. The impact spun him around and knocked him down. He had been shot. The realization came before the pain. Then the pain came. White-hot and blinding, like someone had driven a railroad spike through his shoulder and then set it on fire. Annalisa screamed his name, tried to pull him up. Run, he told her. Leave me, run. No, get up, Callum. Get up. She was crying, pulling at him with strength born of pure desperation. The strength of someone who had already lost everything and refused to lose one more thing. Callum forced himself to stand. His left arm hung useless. Blood soaked through his uniform, spreading dark and wet across the fabric. They staggered the last 50 meters and collapsed into the British tree line just as more bullets tore through the space they had occupied seconds before. Annalisa's hands were already examining his wound with a nurse's trained efficiency. Through and through, missed the bone, but bleeding badly. She tore strips from her dress and wrapped his shoulder tight. professional, fast. Her hands didn't shake now. She was in medical mode, 4 years of training taking over. Can you walk? Have to. They moved deeper into British territory. Behind them, the pursuing soldiers stopped at the invisible line between zones. They could hear angry shouting, Russian and English voices arguing across the border. But they had made it. Somehow, impossibly, they had reached British soil. The British soldiers at the checkpoint raised their rifles as 2 figures stumbled toward them from the tree line. One was bleeding heavily. The other was half carrying him. Behind them, American and Soviet troops stood at the invisible border between zones, weapons raised, shouting demands in 2 languages. Sergeant Owen Cadwallader stepped forward. He was a weathered Welshman who had seen too much war to be surprised by anything anymore. He raised his hand toward the pursuing soldiers. That's far enough, mates. This is British territory. Whatever's happening stops at this line. Callum and Annalise collapsed at the checkpoint. She kept pressure on his shoulder wound while he tried to speak through the pain. Asylum. We're requesting asylum. British protection. Major Leonid Krupin pushed forward, his face red with fury. The scar on his cheek stood out white against flushed skin. Those 2 are fugitives. American deserter and German war criminal. They must be returned to proper authority immediately. An American military police lieutenant added his voice. The soldier is AWOL from the United States Army. He falls under our jurisdiction. Sergeant Cadwallader looked at the 2 people bleeding at his feet, then at the officers demanding their surrender. He thought about his daughter, Emma. She had been 12 years old when a German V-2 rocket hit their street in London in 1940. He had never even found her body, just pieces of their house scattered across 3 city blocks. He had spent 5 years fighting Germans, hating Germans, wanting every last one of them dead. But looking at this woman trying to save an American soldier's life, he didn't see a German. He saw a nurse doing what nurses do. He saw someone who had run far enough. He made a decision that would save 2 lives. Right then, they've requested British protection on British soil. That makes them our problem. Now you lot can file proper paperwork through official channels, but until I hear from my commanding officer, they stay with us. Krupin's hand moved toward his sidearm. Cadwallader's rifle came up instantly, not quite pointing at anyone, but the message was clear. Behind Cadwallader, a dozen British soldiers took defensive positions, the tension stretched like wire, about to snap. For several long seconds, war seemed possible over 2 refugees. Then, the American lieutenant stepped back, seeing how badly this could go. We'll file a formal extradition request. Krupin glared with cold hatred, but he followed suit. This is not over. Never is, Cadwallader agreed. But it's over for today. Clear off. The soldiers withdrew. A British medic came forward to examine Callum's shoulder. You're lucky, he said in a thick Scottish accent. Another inch to the right, it would have hit the artery. Still, you've lost blood. Need stitches. While he worked, Captain Alistair Bromwell arrived. He was a fair-minded officer who had evaluated thousands of desperate stories during the war. He studied the 2 refugees with sharp but not unkind eyes. Right then, who are you and why am I protecting you from our allies? Callum tried to sit straighter, failed. Private Callum Devereux, 69th Infantry Division, or I'm AWOL, deserted 2 days ago. And her Annalisa Hartmann, German civilian, displaced person, fleeing Soviet persecution. Bromwell's eyebrow rose. German civilian, the Soviets claim she's a Wehrmacht nurse wanted for war crimes, Annalisa spoke. Her English was clearer now, strengthened by necessity and desperation. I was nurse, yes, but I committed no crimes. I treated wounded soldiers. I helped Allied prisoners when I could. The Soviets want me because I ran from them, not because I did anything wrong. Bromwell pulled a camp chair over and sat down. Let me understand this correctly. American soldier deserts to protect German nurse from Soviet custody. Both of you cross through active military zones, evade capture, take a bullet, and arrive here requesting asylum. He paused. That about sum it up. Yes, sir. And you expect me to grant asylum to an American deserter and a potential war criminal? Callum met his gaze directly. I expect you to do what's right, not what's convenient. Bromwell's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. What's right? That's a dangerous phrase in wartime. The war is over, sir. Is it? Doesn't feel over. Bromwell stood and paced for a moment. Then he turned. I could hand you both back. Probably should. Would make my life considerably easier. He paused. But I didn't fight 5 years to see people thrown to wolves because of politics. You'll stay in a displaced persons camp until we sort this mess out. Could be weeks, could be months. He looked at Annalisa. And if evidence emerges that you actually committed war crimes, Nurse Hartman, I will hand you over myself. Clear? Clear, thank you. The displaced persons camp was a city of canvas and mud. Thousands of refugees from a dozen nations waited there for the world to decide their fates. Callum and Annalise were processed, photographed, and given tent assignments. Because they had claimed to be married a lie that was becoming easier to tell, they were placed together in the married couples section. The bureaucrats processing refugees had heard stranger stories every day for months. Nobody questioned it. That first night in the camp, lying on cots in a tent shared with 3 other couples, they finally had a moment to breathe. Callum's shoulder throbbed despite morphine. Annalisa's hands still shook from exhaustion. But they were alive. They were together. They were safe for the first time since that checkpoint at the Elbe. What happens now? She whispered. We wait. The British will investigate your background, verify the truth. And when they find I am telling truth, then maybe we get refugee status, permission to stay, build something new. Days turned into weeks. Callum's shoulder healed. Annalisa worked in the camp infirmary. Her nursing skills were desperately needed. Callum helped repair vehicles and equipment. One evening in early June, walking through the camp after their work shifts, Callum stopped suddenly. Marry me, Annalisa turned surprised. What? Marry me? For real? Not for papers? Because I love you, because I cannot imagine waking up without you. She studied his face. We have known each other 1 month. I have known you through things most people never experience in a lifetime. I know you are brave. I know you are kind. That is enough. She was silent for a long moment. Then, yes, I will marry you. They were wed 2 weeks later by the British chaplain. Neither had rings. But when they kissed, as husband and wife, it was the most real thing either had experienced since before the war. In 1954, President Eisenhower pardoned most wartime deserters. By then, Callum and Annalisa Devereux had immigrated to Boston. He opened a garage in South Boston. The sign read Devereux Auto Repair. It's still there today. She became a hospital nurse at Massachusetts General, worked there for 35 years. They had 3 children, Michael born in 1947, Catherine in 1950, Elizabeth in 1953, 7 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren. In 2005, a great-granddaughter named Sarah visited for a school history project. She was 16 years old. How did you two meet? She asked. Callum looked at Annalisa, still beautiful to him at 88. Silver hair, same blue eyes, scarred hands from a lifetime of nursing work. She grabbed my arm, he said, and said, "Don't let them take me." And I decided right then that I wouldn't, not ever. We saved each other, Annalisa added, and we never stopped. Sarah recorded the interview. It's now in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, part of their oral history collection. In 2010, a researcher at the National Archives discovered letters written by American prisoners of war who had been treated at Togau Field Hospital in 1943 and 44. 3 of the letters mentioned Nurse Annalisa, described how she smuggled extra food to them, how she hid wounded Americans from German officers, how she risked her life to protect them. The letters confirmed that Annaliese's story had been true the entire time. When told about the letters, Callum, 93 years old, now frail but sharp, just nodded. I knew. Didn't need letters to tell me who she was. I saw it in her eyes that first day. In March of 2012, Anneliese died. She was 95 years old. The family spread her ashes at the Elbe River checkpoint. The checkpoint is now a memorial site. A plaque reads, "Here millions crossed from darkness into light." April 1945, Callum stood riverside, his children and grandchildren around him. And he spoke. Some orders exist only to be broken. Some strangers are worth everything, and some promises last 60 years and beyond. He died 4 months later, peaceful in his sleep. They found a faded photograph on his nightstand from 1945. Him and Anneliese at the British checkpoint. Blood-stained, exhausted, hands gripped together. On the back in Anneliese's handwriting, the day we chose each other. The day we chose life. The day everything began. History remembers the generals and the treaties. But the true measure of war is found in the small choices made by ordinary people, in the split seconds when someone decides that following orders means losing their soul, in the hands that reach across enemy lines and hold on tight. Callum Devereux never considered himself a hero. He was just a mechanic who fixed broken things. Including, as it turned out, one woman's faith in humanity. They came as enemies.
They left as family, and in the end that was the only victory that truly mattered.